Welcome back to Out of the Fold. This episode is the conclusion of my conversation with YouTuber Apostate Prophet. If you haven't listened to the first part yet, please do so before listening to this one. No religious organizations, companies, or individuals were contacted for comment about any of the content of this episode. The views expressed are strictly those of the ones expressing them. So I know that you said that you had a lot that you could say about this topic. So, if I just want to ask one other question. If we were to sort of compare, and I don't want to keep so this is going to be the last time that I compare the Quran to other holy books, because again, I do acknowledge that it stands completely on its own in what it is.
I love doing that.
So yeah, so just for this last comparison. So fundamentally, when you look at something like the Old Testament, the Torah, versus the Quran, fundamentally, they're not remarkably different in what they teach. So like if you and I don't mean the specifics about what you can and can't do. What I mean is, like, if you wanted to find a reason to be peaceful, if you wanted to find a reason for war, if you wanted to find a reason to tolerate, to be intolerant, to dehumanize, or to empower, you can find all of those in the Quran and in the Torah. And yet we have a lot of Jewish people who will look at the things that are in the Old Testament, in the Torah, and they'll say, we don't need to do all these things anymore. We don't need to stone adulterers. And I guess what I'm curious about is, if they both do welcome fundamentalism, what is it about the way that the Quran is written? What is it about the existence of it that makes it so much more difficult to not be a fundamentalist?
Well, I would like to point out two things first. One is that the Old Testament is, if you read it, the Old Testament is full of stories. It's basically chronological. It's God leading His people, talking to them, His people talking to other people about about what's happening, about how things are handled, about, I don't know. God tells so many stories about what happened and what He said to His people and so on. The Quran goes in a quite different concept. The Quran is more about God directly speaking to the people in the moment. God telling people occasionally stories of older prophets and things that happened, but God, Allah, directly giving orders to His people who read the Quran. In the Torah, for example, we see only examples of what God's people, of what God's prophets went through, and people take examples from that. I would say in Rabbinic Judaism, which is the most common form of Judaism, and today in the West, especially in America, it's Reform Judaism that kind of leads the way. The teaching is that we have the Bible, but we also have the Talmud. The Bible is there to observe what God's people went through, and all the things they experienced, all the things God ordered them to do, all the things God told them to observe. But the Talmud is there because rabbis put together an interpretation of the Bible, and write the law according to our times, according to our modern times, because the Bible is not directly God's spoken verbatim word. The rabbis write the law based on the Bible and tell people what to do. People go to the rabbis and ask them what to do. People go to the rabbis and ask them for the law, ask them for the way, ask them for this behavior and that behavior. And the rabbi gives the regular Jew the instructions on what to do, or advices on what to do. Mm-hmm. And the other thing is that the Bible also orders the Jewish people, to be subjects, which is a very, very big factor in the history of Judaism, in the history of Jews. It's basically the reason why Jews have been living as a diaspora for more than 2,000 years. And the rabbinic teaching, the Jewish teaching, is that Jews should observe their own law, but that they should also, observe the law of the place they are living in, and should be kind, and should be good, should adapt. The Quran is different. The Quran would be completely against such a thing. The Quran explicitly orders the Muslims to move out of the lands of the disbeliever and create their own land and live among Muslims only. The Quran explicitly forbids the Muslim to live in the land of the non-believer. And the Quran asks a direct question. Allah asks a direct question to the Muslim, which is something like, why have you been living under, the non-believers? Wasn't there a place for you to emigrate to? Because that's what Muhammad did. Muhammad lived with the polytheists, and he migrated to Medina and formed his own Islamic state. And that's what Muslims are supposed to do. Muslims are supposed to create their own Islamic state, install their own rules that were all directly given by Allah, allegedly, in the Quran, and are supposed to observe those laws word for word. The Quran is also considered, as said, the direct spoken word of Allah. So a Muslim who is today in 2019 in front of the Quran and reads it is supposed to take that word, take that book as the direct word of Allah, and is supposed to observe every single thing it says. It's not like in Judaism where an authority can come and say, okay, the Quran said that, and what it meant by that is this and this, so you should do this. No, that's not how Islam works. Islam works very differently. Islam works with the Quran as a completely authoritative book that is completely word for word applicable for a Muslim who lives today in the 21st century. And I think that is the biggest difference between other religions and Islam. And that's also the difference between Judaism and Islam in how fundamentalism can be prevented or directly acquired by faith.
That's really interesting. Yeah, that's really interesting. And of course, you have the fundamentalist sects and denominations of other religions, but it just, from the way that you described it, it seems as though basically if you're not a fundamentalist, then the majority of Muslims will believe that you are practicing apostasy, more or less.
Or a heresy, yeah.
Heresy. That's probably a better way to put it. You're right. So let's move forward. How did you... So you said that you identify as... let's start with that. How do you identify now religiously?
I would rather say I'm a free thinker. That's what I usually say. I don't identify as an atheist. You could consider me an atheist, more of an agnostic atheist, but I don't really like to identify with that label for several reasons, for two major reasons especially. I would rather say a free thinker.
Okay. So was there a process for you with that? Like, I know that you said you were like reading the Quran, as you said, you read it about 3 times at this point in your life?
I read it 3 times when I was still a Muslim.
Right.
I read it. I'm still reading it pretty much every day now that I work on that.
Gotcha. So, in the time that you were questioning your faith, did you try out other religions, or did you kind of just jump straight into saying, I'm now an agnostic after that period of skepticism?
Interesting question, actually. I didn't directly go into atheism or into agnosticism. What I did was, at first I convinced myself that I don't believe in Islam anymore, and I don't believe in Allah. So I took the courage and said, I am not a Muslim. I don't believe in Allah. I don't believe in Islam. And that was the day I quit. But after that, I didn't completely stop believing in God. For about another year, I was still wandering around. I tried to read the Bible. I tried to look much more into Christianity, into Judaism, into different beliefs of God, and I just couldn't make anything of it. So when I lost my belief in Islam and in Allah, I was pretty much going into that direction, going out of religion. And it took me another year to acknowledge that God doesn't exist. But I still looked into Christianity and Judaism.
Has your relationship with anybody that you were once close with, like family or friends, changed as your faith has changed?
Well, not someone I was very, very close with. It's something very surprising, but my parents actually don't know that I'm an ex-Muslim and that I'm doing this whole online work. So they don't know about it yet. They just know that I became completely uh, careless about religion, although I was very religious at some point, so much that they admired my religiousness. They loved it so much. But that's also one of the reasons I never wanted to tell them that I now don't believe in Islam anymore. Uh, Otherwise, I've told some people they have been quite okay with it because they were usually people who would be open-minded about such things and who would be understanding with me. Some people questioned why I did this and if I don't think that it's a mistake. There were only some people who were rather distant, who weren't my friends, who had very, very harsh reactions. One of those people even said to me that he would like to cut off my head and throw it in the streets.
Oh my God. Is that something that you've been hearing a bit as you've been doing the YouTube stuff?
Every day, yeah. Well, from people, I mean, I had this thing. I started on Instagram first before I went on to create my YouTube channel. I was kind of trying myself on Instagram. I had a lot of success, a lot of attention there, but it was more just about satire than about really explaining what Islam is about. And during that time, I made this collection of death threats that I received every day. And at some point, I was really tired, and I stopped doing that. It's crazy.
Was it almost like a badge of honor when you got your first one, or was it just pure terror?
No, I think my initial reaction was just laughter. I laughed about it. And I'm still laughing about it. I mean, I don't know what those people are thinking when they send me death threats, but I find it hilarious.
I think that's probably the healthiest reaction you could have to that, honestly.
I find it hilarious.
So, what are your where would you say you stand politically?
I would consider myself, aside from saying the free thinker thing again, I know it's boring, but
it's just not a political party.
Yeah, I would consider myself a centrist very much. I mean, I usually don't talk very much about my political opinions on my in my work that is more about Islam, but I would say politically I am in some ways slightly to the right and in some ways slightly to the left. So I would rather say I'm pragmatic and a centrist.
Yeah, I have to say that I agree with that. I've moved away from a lot of the extreme left-leaning stuff that I was raised with, and I can't say I've ever identified with anybody on the far right. So, I mean, exactly. Like I'm really in the exact same boat there. Like I think that extremism in and of itself is wrong, and it exists politically, it exists religiously. And I just don't want to be a part of either things like that.
Yeah, it's a very good position to stand on. If you are a centrist, if you are more pragmatic about things, if you kind of agree with both sides on specific things, it's a very good point to stand on and to look into both directions, because you can somehow sympathize with something someone says who is much further on the right, and you can still sympathize with something someone says who is very, very far on the left from where you stand. It's kind of, I don't know, it's interesting because if you are on the far left or the far right, you will be completely intolerant of anything that opposes your ideas. But if you stand here, you can just sympathize. You can take both positions, both opinions, and kind of think about them for yourself and just avoid being angry about these things.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I think that when you are on one side, it completely, like, you're right, you're not even really allowing yourself to listen to somebody who disagrees with you about anything.
Absolutely.
Just the smallest thing that sounds like it could be different from what you believe will make you feel as though that person is attacking every essence of your being.
Absolutely.
And there's really no value in that.
Mm-hmm. I like fact-checking things. I like when someone says something, even something that is totally in my favor, or totally something that would be in my favor, whatever. I like to still go there and fact check that and think a bit further about that, and then make up my opinion about that. And it's just not something you can do when you really go into one of those boxes.
Yeah, and I think that Politics are a tricky thing because I feel like you could probably even be an extreme centrist if you really wanted to be.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And like
that's true.
I really want to try to avoid that also, and I think that at times it's like when you want to avoid extremism altogether, you probably sort of seem cowardly to some people who want you to get angrier and want you to just say, this is what I believe and that's all there is to it. But I feel like when you've experienced extremism and you can empathize with people who have seen real extremism, it's the last thing that you want permeating into any aspect of your life.
Yeah, well, to give an example, I'm very sympathetic with the idea of better healthcare the way we have it in Europe. I'm very sympathetic with much more affordable tuition, or supporting that with taxes in a way, because it's beneficial to the whole population. I'm also completely I'm also in agreement that abortion is a choice, but when we come to abortion, I also think there is a limit. In the same way, I also think there is a limit to social justice, for example, to all the social justice matters, the social justice steps that we are trying to take on the left side of politics. And in that, I would even go to very, very right-leaning positions to defend that, to defend that idea. So, I have so many conflicting opinions based on what I think is pragmatic, and I would just not be able to act that way or to think that way if I was too far on the left or too far on the right. So that's why, I don't know, centrism is, I think, a good position if you are really pragmatic, if you really care about a good outcome instead of just rooting for your side.
Right. Like if you want the best for humanity rather than the best for one particular, one particular team to win. Yeah. Yeah, no, I get that. And you know what? So I was raised Quaker, which so Quakerism has this whole thing about peace. And that's like the backbone of it. So being a pacifist, and all of that. And it's interesting to me because the idea of a religion or of, I guess, a way of thinking that is completely based around peace sounds really nice on paper. But you can get an extremism out of that too. And a big thing that made me walk away from Quakerism was the idea that you're not even allowed to defend yourself if somebody attacks you, because that's seen as violent. And to me, that's an extreme. To me, it's absurd that you would not hurt somebody that's attacking you so that you could potentially get hurt and you could potentially not be able to take care of your family anymore. That to me, just there's something that never clicked with me about that. And that I think really opened my eyes when I was really young to what extremism can do, and that it's not always violent extremism. You can have it in either direction.
Yeah. That's a very interesting thing, by the way. Similarly, I mean, if we want to go from there, it's basically the same thing that you just said. But I would consider myself very much a pacifist in terms of, I don't think we should ever be supporting the idea of war and thinking of it as something great. I hate war. I hate military interventions and the whole idea of military discipline and going directly to the idea of war, but sometimes it is necessary. I mean, although I am very much a pacifist, I would sometimes agree that we need war in some cases in order to solve a problem. So as said, there can be also extremism in that.
I totally agree. And I'm 100% anti-war. I mean, I don't think I've ever spoken with even a soldier who's like pro-war. You know what I mean? Like they're doing it so that somebody else doesn't have to do it. They ultimately have a moral backbone behind what they're doing that isn't about going to another country and just killing as many people as they can. I've never met a soldier with that mentality. But you're right. I mean, it's like, if we're trying to solve all the world's problems, it's like you might be able to create some sort of a system where you solve your problems without war. And then what if there's a society that develops that doesn't acknowledge the way that you've lived your life, that doesn't acknowledge this way? It's like you have to be able to prepare for war in that type of situation.
That's one of the things that where I have a problem with the political left in the West, for example, in America, where people think that that we should just all embrace each other, forget about borders, forget about walls, forget about the military and this and that, and be just completely accepting and tolerant of everything. But that's a wonderful idea. That's a brilliant, beautiful idea. Great. It's really great that you think that way. It's really wonderful that you think that way, that you are that way. But not everyone agrees with you.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we are in a world where many other cultures will absolutely not agree with that. Where in 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 countries like Pakistan, for example, the vast majority absolutely does not agree with that. And if you want to embrace that culture and mix with that culture, with that opinion that you have, you will have a lot of trouble.
Yeah. Yeah, and there's definitely a place for it. Like I'm really inspired by there are two people that I've been really thinking about recently as I've been doing the show. Dia Khan is she's a filmmaker from Norway, and she was raised in she's Muslim, or she, at least, I don't actually know what her belief system is now, but she was raised into a Muslim family, and she was more or less hated by everybody. Like her family wanted her to pursue music, so she did, but she was surrounded by neo-Nazis, white neo-Nazis in the area that were just actively against her because she had brown skin, and then her family and other Muslims were against her because she wanted to be a musician, and this was actually something that her father encouraged her to do. So she made all these movies and documentaries. So there was one in particular, and I'm sure that there would be one more that would relate more to this that she made, that was about where she actually met jihadis. But there was one in particular where she came to the United States and she talked to people that were white nationalists. And in the process of doing so, just sitting and talking to them, a bunch of them decided to renounce their racism, just by talking to them. And there's this guy, Daryl Davis, also, who's a black musician who has, in the time that he's been... so I think it's like over the past 20 years or so, he has befriended KKK members, and in doing so has gotten about 200 of them to give up their hoods and robes.
Oh yeah, I read about that. It was amazing.
It's incredible. So, there is evidence that, we're not saying to go out and hug a Nazi and that's gonna make them change their ways. But like there has to be some sort of balance there. There has to be something where we acknowledge that, that there's value in sitting down and talking to people that you disagree with, because that obviously can actually cure these, xenophobic views and racist views. But maybe we also need to acknowledge the fact that the reason that we're even allowed to have this is because we live in a country where we have the freedom to do it because of the fact that we have people that are prepared for war.
Absolutely. It's a great idea to never want to use your gun, but it's also a good idea to have one.
Yeah.
If you're in such an environment,
Yep. Have your political views changed? Have all of that? Did you said that you identified with a communist group at one point, but when you were younger, I mean, did your family have a slant as far as what they believed politically?
What my parents believed?
I guess what they wanted you to believe politically when you were younger.
Well, they were always sympathetic with me being kind of a, of a Turkish nationalist person who is also conservative about societal issues and religious. That was their expectation of me. I mean, if you, in Turkish families, in Turkish culture, it's very important to be nationalist. But as rebellious as I was, I didn't really go there. I tried nationalism when I was in Turkey, but then I decided to to identify with socialism and communism for about 2 to 3 years. That was a very interesting phase, by the way. That was the first time where my parents kicked me out of the house 2 to 3 times. Because that's just not something you can do in a Muslim family. In a religious Muslim family, you can't be a communist. That's ridiculous. So, yeah, I was there. They hated it. But after that adventure was over, I became a religious Muslim. So they were totally fine with that. And once that was over, I didn't disclose anything about my beliefs and views to my family any further.
But I guess what I'm asking is like, did you ever have the views about, like, LGBT issues and the other things associated with human rights, things like that? Like, obviously, you've talked a lot about the views that you have right now, but when you were growing up, when you would say that you were a Muslim, or with the views that your parents wanted you to have, were you ever really fully involved with the views that are actually contrary to the ones that you have right now?
Oh, okay, okay. I see, I see. Sorry, I kind of misunderstood where it was going.
No, it's fine.
Well, I did. I mean, I had a big mix of political views and beliefs. But the thing is, I was also very apolitical before I moved to Turkey, and especially before I became a communist. So it wasn't really applicable to me to have many, radical political beliefs that conflicted with with what I was expected to believe, or conflicting with what I was and what I identified as. So I was quite apolitical, and I became political only much later as a communist. That's where my path started, and that's where I had pretty much everything that a communist was supposed to have.
Gotcha. So, I guess I only had one other question. What would you say, it means to you, today? Like, does it say anything about somebody if you're having a conversation with them and they tell you that they're Muslim?
What it means to me when they are a Muslim?
Yeah, and I'm not looking for like, I guess, like, does that even tell you something about their character? I mean, does that mean anything to you?
It's a very interesting question. One I would like to think about a little bit.
Okay.
No, well, it doesn't tell me actually very much about them. I mean, of course, when someone tells me that they are a Muslim, I take specific measures in how I talk to them and what I disclose to them, how I approach them. Of course, I will have, so I will have an attitude in a way because I know on average what a Muslim feels and what a Muslim thinks. But I think mostly, unless there is a heated debate, unless there is a very specific debate about a very specific thing, it doesn't really matter to me that much. I will not say that I'm completely virtuous and will not be prejudiced or will not think about their identity as a Muslim at all. I do, of course, because there are strings to that, and there are specific things that I will do or not do, or that I will say or not say. But I try to keep that very, very limited. I try to see the person who stands before me merely as a human, only making up my thoughts on that person based on how he acts and what he says. If it comes to a debate, if it comes to a discussion, a political discussion, a religious discussion, then of course everything takes a course depending on what the discourse is.
So
I know it was very vague.
No, that's fine. Do you think that there's like a good way to try to convince a Muslim that that they're, I don't know if brainwashed is the right term or if it's condescending to say that. I don't mean it in either way, honestly. Mm-hmm. But like out of empathy, out of if I knew that one of my friends was in a cult and that like that cult was going to lead to something that was really damaging later on, I would want to warn my friend. You've been in Islam, you've seen what it can do. I mean, is there an approach that you think would work or that would be helpful towards getting somebody to realize that they're that they're wrong, but in a loving way?
Well, I would say first off, what I do is I had this decision after I became an ex-Muslim, after I became a non-Muslim, not to talk to people about religion at all, especially unless they ask me. especially to friends or to anyone. I mean, I thought I don't really need to talk to anyone because I don't believe in a God anymore. I don't believe that I need to take people to heaven. So there was really no need to talking to an individual and trying to deconvert him. But if it came to trying to convince a Muslim that Islam is wrong or that he should think about it further again, I think. It really depends on who that person is, but I think one thing that I try to do if I have a one-on-one conversation with someone or a one-on-one, you know, conversation in the comment section on YouTube or on Twitter or anywhere with someone, with a Muslim, what I try to do is to approach the thing quite softly, is to, you know, make clear that I have some knowledge, some understanding of what he believes in and of what he thinks, and especially of what he thinks when I, a non-Muslim, talk to him about Islam. Because Muslims are taught very often from childhood that any person who is not a Muslim and who talks to them about their religion is probably their opponent. It probably tries to corrupt them and try to change their religion. So I think I would first make clear that I am not such a person. So I would try to stay very, very calm and very polite and nice and approach with empathy. Then I would try to invite them to have some empathy, to think from my perspective, and then try to address as quickly as possible some things, some regularly popularly held beliefs about the Quran, and would advise them to look at specific parts of the Quran and to think about specific teachings that they are taught from childhood. I wouldn't say these are scientific mistakes. I think scientific issues or factual flaws in the Quran is something that many Muslims wouldn't directly receive sympathetically. I would say that the first focus should be moral questions, because especially in today's time, where our modern Western values have an unbelievably big impact on the rest of the world, a very big influence on the rest of the world, such a big influence that the regular Western person doesn't even realize we have. I would try to address very, very problematic moral issues in Islam, show them directly the proof without them having to ask me about proof, or without them telling me that I'm just making this up, you know, showing it directly to them, and then asking them what they think about it. For example, something that I actually did with a woman, with a girlfriend of one of my best friends who was a believing Muslim. Not a very religious Muslim, but a believing Muslim. She confronted me. I said, I don't want to talk to you about Islam. I don't want to talk to you about your faith. I have no need to convert you out of your religion. But she insisted that we talk about religion. So I was like, okay, fine. You want to do this? Let's do it. So I took a Quran that I had at home, and I showed her directly. The first thing that came in my mind that I wanted to show her was chapter 4, verse 34 in the Quran, which talks about wife beating, where the Quran directly tells Muslim men that if they fear arrogance on their wife's side, they should warn them first, then separate beds, and if that doesn't help, strike them, beat them. And I showed her that Quran first. I just let her that Quran first, and then said, so what do you think of that? You know? Because I know that she's a more modern person who values our modern values, and who wouldn't agree with wife beating per se. So I confronted her with that and just asked her what she thinks about that, and if she doesn't think that it's a little bit odd that the Almighty God orders this, but she today thinks that it is completely morally wrong to beat a woman. And that's where I kind of got her, you know. She kind of tried to make sense of it, tried to kind of rationalize it, tried to say that it's probably a man's right to discipline his wife just because she had to defend Islam. But after that, I noticed that she didn't want to confront me about Islam any further, and it gave her something to think. And I value that. I don't need to immediately convert this person, immediately pull this person out of Islam. But if I can place something there, if I can place a little bit of doubt there and give them something to think about, then I will just hope that they will make more of that, that they will come back to me in the future. And I think that I have made a good step in the right direction.
Yeah. Yeah, you're
Was
not.
was it a very long answer?
No, that's fine. It was great. I mean, I think that, the point with that, I mean, we get so in the habit sometimes of thinking that the way to change minds is to like yell at them in the street,
Yeah.
And there's I don't know if there's scientific evidence, but there's evidence that does not work. And it doesn't help anything.
Yeah.
So, no, yeah, you're right. I mean, sit down and just treat them with empathy and like a human being.
I think it's a good strategy to analyze their current morals, their current thoughts on morals, their current worldview, find a contradiction with that in their beliefs, and then confront them with that, in a friendly way.
And it sounds also like, you sound like you've got a really logical mind, like a really logical way of thinking. I could see how maybe, disagreeing with the morals in the Quran made you, start to question just whether or not you wanted to believe in the Islamic God. But was there a turning point that made you decide that you just don't believe in God in general, rather than just you don't agree with these particular teachings?
Well, yeah. I mean, my disagreement with Islam was not only because of the moral issues. I mean, the moral issues were definitely a big factor. When I read the Quran and I read about wife beating, it shocked me. When I read about how to treat a disbeliever, or when I read that Allah directly insults Christians and Jews and calls them the worst of creation, of course it shocked me. But that wasn't where I had to jump off. I jumped off when I realized that there are very, very big logical contradictions, not scientific mistakes. Scientific mistakes were also a factor, but very big logical contradictions in what God expects from me and what I am capable of. I think one of the final things was, together with the scientific flaw, with the sun sinking in a muddy spring, one of the things that really turned me off was the realization that if I left Islam, I would deserve the death penalty ordered by Allah, and go to hell forever, and called the worst of creation in the Quran. Although I have tried to be a great person all my life, it just made logically no sense. But I don't know, with many logical contradictions, I just came to the conclusion. But after that, not believing in God altogether, not only the Islamic God, came with many, many logical convictions. And one of them is something that I like to call personally the why paradox. Why as in the letter Y. And it would make more sense if I would be able to draw that, but I don't know how much I can follow that right now without having it in front of me. But the basic premise of that is that that I can't believe in a God who will send me to heaven, will send me to hell if I disbelieve, because imagine the shape of a Y. Imagine that as a path. In the middle of that path splits into two paths. One of them goes to heaven and one of them goes to hell. I am in the middle of it. I am just a mere human. And God, who has three qualities at least, created me. Those three qualities are good, almighty, and all-knowing. Now, before God created me, he knew what I was going to be, right? Mm-hmm. He knew that I would eventually use my free will. This also invalidates free will as an argument. He knew before he created me and after he created me, but importantly, before he created me, he knew exactly that if he created me, I would use my free will in the wrong way eventually and end up in hell. You can't say that I made the decision by myself because I have free will. God knew that from the very, very beginning, before he even created me, because he's almighty and all-knowing. That means that if I make a wrong choice now, and if I use my free will in the wrong way, choose disbelief and go to hell and burn in there forever, that God knew from the very beginning that I would go this path and go and end up in hell and burn there forever. Mm-hmm. In this case, God is either not good, not almighty, or not all-knowing. And if one of these qualities disqualify, if God doesn't have one of these qualities, then he can't be God. He can't be the God that we have been introduced to. He can't be the God preached to us as the one and only God. Mm-hmm. He can't be real. I think that's one of the biggest arguments against the existence of God.
Yeah, and you talked about that a little bit earlier with the scientific things, but you're right. Just if you break it down logically, yeah, and it would be one thing if the teachings didn't say that God does some things sometimes, some things another times, some things in a different way. It's that he is all three all the time. So logically, you're right. You created a paradox by examining that.
I mean, I would even say, imagine yourself in the position of God. Would you create a little being that has feelings and choices and pain and suffering, and you create that, and you know that it will go the wrong way and burn there forever? Would you really do that? Would you really be God and do that? You wouldn't. So why do you think your God would do that?
Right. Yeah. I think for me, a lot of it when I started questioning my faith was yes, because I disagreed with it. But I think at first it was like I was willing to say that I disagreed with it strongly enough that I didn't care if I believed in it or not. I was just not willing to worship this God. And then when it became that I wasn't willing to worship that God, and like I had realized that it all kind of went from there. Like if there was an evil king, I wouldn't deny that king was in power. Mm-hmm. I would just accept that king was in power and that I was going to do things my own way. And then, so if I put that same thing in the place of God, it's just, from there on, it's like when I started living my life that was in a way that was contrary to the way that God wanted me to live it. And I mean, like, I never killed anybody or anything like that. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like I'm not gay, but like I never thought that there was anything wrong with being gay. And I was having premarital sex and things like that. Like none of the things that the Bible was telling me would happen were happening. It was just like a math problem. It was like I solved for X, and when I solved for X, it was that nothing that I thought to be true was true. And I wasn't testing anything. Everybody was telling me that like you can't test God, and that's why it wouldn't work. And it's like, well, I wasn't even thinking about God when I was doing it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would like every believer to think about one specific thing that I always questioned throughout my entire life, even as an early teenager, even when I was religious, and I suppressed it when I was religious, but especially afterward, is just imagine yourself in Ireland in the 15th century, and you are born in Ireland as a Catholic Christian. If you are a Muslim now, just imagine yourself in Ireland. Would you really be born there in that environment? Everyone else around you is a Catholic Christian. Would you really end up becoming a Muslim, converting to Islam, and going to the Islamic heaven? Mm-hmm. If you are a Christian and you were born in Arabia in that time, into a complete Muslim tribe, into a complete Muslim family, would you really convert to Christianity in those circumstances and go to the Christian heaven? You wouldn't. Why is religion so much dependent on our location on earth, on where we are? It just doesn't make sense. It's not your choice. It's just you know what I mean. You get what I mean.
Yeah. I think that like if there is one view of God that I don't necessarily agree with, but it makes the most sense to me, it would be pantheism. Just the idea that that God is everything, and that we're all connected. And I guess maybe it's just because it sounds nice, and it doesn't sound like it's forcing itself on anything. And it could 100% be wrong, but I've never met a pantheist that was trying to convince me that my lack of belief or that anybody else's belief was wrong, or that they were right. They just seem to get something about the universe that very few others seem to, and in a beautiful way. And so I don't know. Like I definitely don't believe that there's a God, but I don't necessarily think that if somebody told me that there was a God, that I would say I deny that God. You know what I mean? Like I know how many things I've been wrong about, that I acknowledge that I could be wrong about this too.
Yeah. Well, I want to say, to touch on an earlier point that we mentioned about atheism. I don't identify as an atheist because one, atheists are have this tendency to be very obnoxious if they go online and talk about atheism.
Yeah, agreed.
Sorry, atheist community, but it's really a pain in the ass. The ways they criticize religion or make fun of religion, it's really annoying. I don't have anything against people based on what they believe in. I mean, based on their belief in God. I don't care if people believe in the Christian God or the Islamic God or in Judaism or Hinduism or whatever. I don't criticize Islam or Muslims because of the belief in Allah. I don't care about that. I have respect for people's choice to believe in that Allah, and I really don't care. I have a problem with Islam because of its teachings, because of what it does around the world. I also don't have any problem with any other religion, and people know that about me, and that's why I also stay a little bit away from the whole anti-theist, atheist label thing. But one other reason why I don't want to call myself an atheist is I just consider it a little bit arrogant to call myself an atheist because, okay, I firmly don't believe in the one God, the Judeo-Christian God or Islamic God. I am fully convinced that I don't believe in that God. That's for sure. But aside from that, we don't know anything else. We don't know anything about our universe. We don't know exactly where we came from. Our current convictions, our current beliefs are based on theories about what we know so far. We call the universe because we assume that it is this way. And we even have this term called observable universe because we only see this much in the universe. We have no idea what is beyond that, and everything that is beyond that is only based on what we estimate and what we assume. So we really don't know what is outside of all of this mess that we see when we look outside of our planet. It could be anything. I don't believe that there is anything supernatural. I don't believe that there is any big entity controlling all of us or big entities controlling us. But I also don't know what else there is. And I also don't know how exactly we came into existence. Of course, the current interpretations and theories of evolution make sense and the Big Bang makes sense. But we are not sure about that, and we are not sure about the beginning of the Big Bang and what happened before. And with all this limited knowledge, with all this ignorance, with our limited view on the universe, with what we call the observable universe, it would be kind of equal to different false convictions as I see them, to call myself an agnostic atheist today. To call myself a gnostic atheist today, to be clearer. That's why I'm just a free thinker. I don't know more than anyone else does, and I aspire to know more about our future as soon as we know more about our future. That's it.
You've reminded me of a really good thing that that I should probably remind myself more of also, which is absence of evidence isn't evidence of absence. I think you're right that we need to remind ourselves of that every once in a while as well.
Absolutely.
So I don't think I've got any other questions. Was there anything else that you wanted to say? Anything you wanted to say to the ex-Muslim community? Anything you wanted to say to Muslims, to just anybody listening of any faith or anybody questioning their faith?
Well, I would say, first off, I would say to the Muslims, Muslims usually have this idea that people who criticize Islam, especially people who left Islam, do this for all kinds of reasons, but not because they are convinced that Islam is wrong. Like that we are doing it for money or for fame or for acceptance by others and this and that. I would say the first thing to consider is to put yourself in the position of an ex-Muslim, or in the position of a critic of Islam, but especially in the position of an ex-Muslim. And think about the whole thing again. If you are a Muslim and you came to the conclusion that Islam is not true for some reason, even if you can't believe it right now, you would also be sitting here and talking about how wrong Islam is and how morally problematic Islam is. So I would suggest every Muslim to be empathetic about this, and secondly, to question what they believe in, because a Muslim is told from a very young age not to question their faith, because Islam teaches that those people who ask too many questions are problematic. Islam also teaches in a hadith that if someone has any question about the existence or origins of Allah, that he should immediately be quiet, immediately forget that thought and seek refuge in Allah. So that combined with the death threat for apostasy, Muslims are, I would say, the most fiercely opposing religious group when it comes to questioning their religion. I can't think of any other religious group that is so much opposed to questioning their religion in any way. I would say to any Muslim, please question your faith. Please read the Quran in a language that you understand and compare it to your current moral thoughts and convictions. You will see that there is a problem with that. And please be empathetic, and please don't consider me your enemy. I'm not. To ex-Muslims, I would say they are already doing a great job. They are brave people. They are very courageous. I would advise humbly from my side to, I don't know. I don't even know what to advise. I think they're all doing a great job. I would just advise to be reasonable in their way of criticizing Islam and explaining their own position. To everyone else, I would say I am just as ignorant and just as knowledgeable, just as stupid and just as smart as you are. And let's all love each other.
I learned recently that there are actually two definitions of atheism, or at least that being an atheist can mean two different things. One definition is lacking belief in God, and the other is believing that there is no God. When I think about the types of people who annoyed me to the point of not wanting to call myself an atheist when I was younger, I'm pretty sure most of them adhere to the latter. But now, I'd bet there are plenty of people who sincerely believe that there is no God, that have evidence that I haven't heard, that would make me question whether I should take that step. For now, though, I simply don't believe in God, meaning that I haven't been convinced that God exists, but I wouldn't consider myself an agnostic atheist because I'm certain I will continue to not believe in God until there is evidence showing that I should, at which time my belief would only mean acceptance of that truth and not necessarily worship. Apostate Prophet called himself a free thinker, and although free thinkers have at times been persecuted by religious and political systems alike, I'd never considered basing a spiritual perspective around it. It felt too unsure, and maybe even a little bit insulting. Like if I were to say I'm a free thinker, then I'd feel like I'd be perceived as saying you're not one unless you call yourself one too. As I considered it more, though, the more I liked it as at least a foundation of something upon which a theology worth exploring would be based. A community of free thinkers would encourage each other to find truth and then actively build morality around that. And morality would continue to evolve as what was once thought to be true is disproven entirely or partially. Plus, Abrahamic religions teach that we will know God by experiencing his works, and God is in us and around us. Therefore, if God exists, then he wants us to explore what he has created within our minds. Free thinking, then, is not insulting. It is rebellion against that which urges us to deny the mind its path to truth. And if these religions are correct, then God will make himself evident. Free thinking doesn't demand hedonism, condone atrocity, vilify kindness, or punish crises of conscience. It welcomes ideas from religion, science, history, philosophy, and personal experience, and accepts that the only thoughts that keep you from the truth are the ones you don't allow yourself to address. There would be no stigma for saying, I don't know. Rather, it would signal a call to action and unleash a rush of excitement for the potential to get one step closer to the truth. So what should we do? Establish some sort of edifice with an individual with 2 PhDs at the front of its largest room, talking about topics of discussion for that week? I don't think so. We live in an amazing era because we have all the world's knowledge at our fingertips, And for a few $100s, we can travel to most places in the world for an even closer look. Never have we been as connected as we are right now. The only difference between intellectuals and lay people is that intellectuals know some things a few minutes before the rest of us can find out the same information by tapping our thumbs on rectangles. We can quench our thirst for knowledge in ways we've never been able to do. And this has only been this way for about 25 years. This is why I've called upon my ex-Christian brethren to support ex-Muslims. Ex-Muslims are not publicly accepted by conservative Muslims, and they're largely ignored by many non-Muslims because they consider them too controversial, or they just don't know how to feel about them, and they don't want to offend Muslims. We are all apostates, and though apostasy means something very different in modern Christianity than it does in modern Islam, it connects us in, at minimum, our exaltation of free thought. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please leave a 5-star review and share it with someone you trust. For immediate updates and discussions, follow the show on Twitter at OutFoldPodcast and my subreddit r/OutOfTheFold. Special thanks to Apostate Prophet for approving all of this conversation being shared. Logo and artwork by my wife. Production by my wife and I. All music by me. Remember to check out Apostate Prophet's YouTube channel. The link is in the description. He recently made a statement on YouTube about being permanently suspended on Twitter. If you stand with his right to express his views, please join those of us petitioning Twitter to restore his account with the hashtag #RestoreApostateProphet. Talk in 2 weeks. This has been Out of the Fold.